minutes now, we've got Boris Johnson back with a deal, although his efforts in securing changes to the Northern Irish Protocol and the political declaration in the future relationship are commendable. The simple fact is it is still a dire deal. It's terrible. And the situation we now find ourselves in is those who previously condemned this deal are now behind it when 95% of the text is unchanged. We've got a situation where we have a diluted backstop. Northern Ireland will be under a different customs regime. She might officially be part of the UK customs union, but for all intents and purposes, being run by the European Union's customs union means there's regulatory difference between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. We've still to pay £39 billion and more again, because that is just the initial payments, not the ongoing liabilities that have been identified by the European Union, will still be adjudicated, or the deal will still be adjudicated by the European Court of Justice. And on top of that, nothing's changed in fishing, nothing's changed in defence, and nothing has changed on security cooperation. What we're still being pushed towards by the political declaration is associate membership of a whole raft of EU policies, and any way anyone cuts it, that is not the Brexit that the majority of people envisaged or voted for. Specifically to fishing, what we see is a dire situation. Nothing has changed in the withdrawal agreement regards the transition. What this means is that although Britain will officially leave the European Union, what we then do under this internationally legally binding treaty is we reobey all EU laws that we just left, including the Common Fisheries Policy. And what this means is that the EU can implement any detrimental legislation to try and hurt British industries. It could be for fishing, could be for the City of London, car manufacturing, you name it, it could be your industry. Specifically in fishing, what the EU can do is implement its ill-founded discard ban. And what this ban does is not address the cause of discards, but addresses or bans the symptom. So currently just now, in a highly mixed fishery around the British Isles, it is impossible for fishermen to find the exact species that their quota allows them to catch. So what currently happens is that when fishermen catch too much of, say, cod, they need to throw that back over the side dead and continue fishing for other species, including cod, to find what they're allowed to keep. What happens when the discard ban's fully enforced is that when vessels exhaust their lowest quota, they must stop fishing and return to port. And the government's own agency, Seafish, has estimated that 60% of the UK's quotas will go uncaught, and presumably a similar proportion of the fleet will go bankrupt due to these early closures. So the EU can fully enforce the discard ban. The EU can abolish the 12 nautical mile limit, which is a temporary derogation. This protects our inshore fishermen, but the EU could take that away. The EU could use UK resources and access to UK waters as negotiating capital in any international agreement. And on top of that, although the agreement says that relative stability quota shares, how much each member state gets of quotas, will be maintained, it doesn't stop the European Commission from cutting those quotas that the UK is dependent on. So although we might still have 90% share of North Sea haddocks, if the EU reduces that quota to zero, 90% of zero is zero. So the transition puts fishing in a terrible place, and it puts UK business as a whole in a terrible place. We will be entirely at the EU's mercy. As the Prime Minister once called it, we would be a vassal state. Now, that transition was for originally 21 months. It will take us to the start of 2021, but it can be extended thereafter all the way to 2023. So the EU has plenty time to do severe damage to British fishing, coastal communities, and other industries. What Boris Johnson has achieved is a slightly revised political declaration, but there's no change in fishing or defence or security cooperation. On fishing, many people are taken in by the headline that says we will be an independent coastal state, but the political declaration, which we're obliged to ratify under the terms of the withdrawal agreement, says that we will agree a fisheries agreement based on non-discrimination. Now, that is the founding principle of equal access to a common resource. We will be bound under the agreement under Part 4 to maintain a level playing field. So that means effectively regulatory alignment. We can't diverge with our own rules. We will be obliged also to maintain freedom of establishment. Now, what freedom of establishment means is that big EU companies can register in Britain and buy up British fishing entitlement, fishing licenses and fishing boats. And what that resulted in, which was forced upon us by the European Court of Justice, is that half the quota that the UK does get of its miserable share within Europe is owned by these, or held by these EU-owned but UK-registered flagships. If we had full independence, we could deal with that. We could implement or reinstate Mrs. Thatcher's economic link, which was overturned by the European Court of Justice. But this this political declaration, which is effectively the draft terms of the free trade agreement, means that we won't be able to do that. So what we're being driven towards through the transition, when the EU can take us to pieces, is a political declaration and a free trade agreement that effectively drives us into associate membership of the common fisheries policy and a host of other EU policies. Now, that is not Brexit. The UK has been set up to be ensnared in permanent EU regulatory orbit. Now, many people will have seen a huge swathe, particularly of the Conservative establishment, swinging in behind this deal. And that's because many of them have convinced themselves that now there is an obligation to move towards a free trade agreement, that all will be well in the world. What this misses is we've got to survive the transition first, and what it also misses is that to get to that free trade agreement, any arrangements still have to get through Parliament. Now, the biggest problem just now, the thing that has absolutely driven Brexit into the ground, is the fact we have a Remain establishment and a Remain Parliament. Now, what will end up happening is that the government and Boris Johnson, even if they want to secure a brilliant free trade agreement, even if they want to walk away from the table, what we will have is a Remain Parliament tying them into knots, doing so at the behest of the European Union. So the idea that we're going to suddenly move on after a dire transition to some sort of sunlit uplands of a magical free trade agreement is for the birds. No, there is no way, absolutely no way, that the Remain Parliament is going to allow Boris Johnson and the Conservative government and the European Research Group the freedom they want to see to agree a free trade agreement. So the options are this. Either we agree this deal, in which case we effectively have an extension, but under the auspices of a transition. And during that time, the EU can severely damage British industries and British interests. And at the end of that, we will still have the same Remain Parliament working in collusion with the EU to agree a deal that is detrimental to Britain, but beneficial to the EU. The second option is for the government to sit tight, hold out for the general election that's coming, and use that to clear a Remain establishment and a Remain Parliament out. This will then give the government the freedom to pursue a clean Brexit and a decent free trade agreement, where the government controls Parliament and is free to be able to pursue British interests. There is no way that this deal can go through. If it does, it is a complete betrayal of Brexit. So we implore all MPs not to vote for it, and Fishing for Leave stands alongside the Bruges Group, the Bow Group, Facts for EU, Labour Leave, and a host of other Brexit groups in opposing this deal. We stand full square behind the DUP, and we hope that others do as well, because it's a simple fact. What we have is a Remain Parliament and a Brexit electorate. Voting for this deal will not get Brexit done. It will see another 3 to 4 years of a protracted fight and deadlock in Parliament as the UK argues amongst itself and is tied in knots by the European Union as we move towards a free trade agreement which the EU will make sure it's its favour. So MPs either vote for this deal, and when people realise the pup that we have been bounced into at a day's notice, they will be cleared out in a general election. Or they hold out for that general election, honouring Brexit, honouring the manifestos they were elected on in 2017, in which case Britain can move forward to a great relationship with the EU. Free, independent and sovereign, just as we voted for.